Alright folks, settle down, settle down. I've asked you all to join me here at the base of operations so I could hold this press conference and address a comment that was made on my last video. And this goes out to AD. He's a sub on my channel, so shout out to you. He goes, "Hi Relentless, I strongly recommend a video about health versus armor. I know that you did one months ago, but we need another updated one. And now, it will help out, bro. Thanks again." So let's get in here out of the rain so I can fully go over what one of my subs have requested for me to do an update on. And plus this rain has made my hair all frizzy, so that's why I had to put on this cap. So let's hop inside and get out of this weather. Alright, so we've made our way to the firing range. Now that we're out of the weather outside, my hair can begin to start unfrizzifying itself, if unfrizzifying is a word. Anyways, it is now. But anyways, today we are talking about armor versus health. Which one you should spec into and how do they work? Well, it's kind of easy and simple as far as how they work. Because they haven't changed since the launch of the game. And what I mean by this, since the launch of the game, it's always been 400k armor can absorb just as much damage as 400k health. The only things that change this would be the baked-in damage to health that are on ARs, and the baked-in damage to armor on shotguns, as well as offensive mods that can have damage to health and damage to armor on them. Now, the next thing you have to ask yourself is, what state of a dark zone are we in? Things have changed, and which changed up, the line of thinking from pre-Title Update 6 to where we're at now in Title Update 6. Now it has changed from more armor builds to the likes of the assault rifle with the perfect talents with berserk and clutch, because more or less using that berserk clutch with those perfect talents, as well as just using an AR in general with that 29% damage to health, is really super effective, especially when you're going against other builds that are utilizing the berserk and clutch varieties that we predominantly see in the dark zones today. And what I mean by this is, if they're utilizing an AR, and this is not even an AR build, let's say their damage is 16.8. Well, if they're fighting another clutch berserk build that are predominantly health, then instead of 16.8, they're going at 22k, which is a very big increase. 16 to 22, yeah, that's about 6k extra a bullet. And as an example, let's say you are running an AR berserk clutch build. You go into the dark zone and you encounter someone that's utilizing the same build, except for they're running SMGs and you're running an AR. Both of your armor pools are the exact same. Both of your health pools are the exact same. You both stand toe to toe, and every single shot both of you shoot. The AR is going to outright win, especially with the 29% damage to health. So essentially, if that damage to health wasn't on there, then it would come down to pure gun skills, making the other miss, movement, and accuracy. But the way it is now, we have advantages and disadvantages, and that's where that 29% damage to health comes into play. The advantage that the SMG has would be that it doesn't have to spec into as much crit chance, because the SMG has the baked-in crit chance, so in turn, they can have a little bit more crit damage than the likes of an AR berserk clutch build. So yes, they get damage increase with as far as when it comes to crit damage, but is it equivalent enough to that 29% damage to health? And it depends on the amount of crit damage you have above and beyond will determine that factor. So it's going to vary to each individual's and each individual's build based on the amount of crit damage one has. But the possibilities know the majority, most people don't, so in other words, the AR with the built-in damage to health will still outright win, unless it has at least, over 30% more crit damage than what the other one has, just to kind of counteract that 29% damage to health. Now, the other builds that are in the division are armor-based, and what I mean by that, armor-based, and that would be the likes of Bloodsucker, Unbreakable, and Unstoppable Force. They all give you a percentage value depending on the overall total of your armor. For Perfect Unbreakable, for this instance, If I have 400k armor, then the proc of Unbreakable will be 400k armor. Now, if I have 400k armor with Bloodsucker and I only get 25% bonus armor once I rip armor off of an individual, then that will equivalent to be 100,000 back in armor. And with PvE, you can have up to 6 stacks, and I believe it's only 2 stacks in PvP. So essentially, 2 stacks, 200k armor. But that 100k is dependent on my armor pool because we get a percentage, and that's what Bloodsucker is. That percentage bounces off our total armor pool, which determines how much of a chunk that will actually be. Berserk is the only thing that differs and more or less is the opposite end of the spectrum when it comes to the health of the armor. If you want the most bang for your buck, the most potential from Berserk, then you would go health over armor, and you would be wanting your armor to be, ripped away, so that way you get the most bang for your buck from Berserk. And then you can accompany that with other talents like Cloak that are dependent on your armor breaking, as well as the Negotiator's Dilemma. You also want your armor to break, so therefore you would more or less value health over armor, especially if you accompany that with the likes of Clutch. Because with Clutch, you also are limited to 4 defensive Legos. Any more than that, you don't get Clutch, but with Clutch, you can more or less self-heal. But that's a whole nother can of worms. But essentially, the way it is now, since everyone are utilizing ARs, then you have to take in consideration that 29% damage to health, and that will cause you to fluctuate your armor and your health values. And what I mean by this is, before, you could actually utilize, tons more health over armor and just, rely on your health pool, because other weapons were predominantly stronger than the AR that still made them match, to like a 40k LMG, even with the 29% baked in damage to health. I mean, the scales were still tipped to LMGs. But since LMGs took a big hit, especially the M60s, and the ARs got a bump, that's where the tide started shifting. So now we have to spec into more armor and not so much on health, and have to find what I call our sweet spot. And what I mean by that, if you're acceptable to only gaining 8 to 16% additional weapon damage from 20 to 40% of your armor being depleted, then armor over health is your overall ratio. Now, in my opinion, I won't put together any build that has at least 100k health. I like having a good amount of both, no matter what I'm using. Now, to certain situations, depending on what weapons I'm using, will determine how much more armor over health that I'll actually have. Case in point, the shotgun. Now we're going to round some values out, so let's call this shotgun right here that let's say it's hitting for 300k. Now, when it comes to the difference between a shotgun Berserk build versus an AR and LMG Berserk build would be that right there. The overall damage base of the weapon, 300k, and let's say our AR is at 30k. So if we have perfect Berserk, which gives us 10% weapon damage for every 20% armor. So 20% of our armor is depleted, that 10% going to a shotgun is going to be 10 times the amount in which we get from the likes going to an LMG or an AR. That 300k damage is actually going to go to 330k, and then of course on a 30k AR it's going to go to 33. Big difference. And that is why with a shotgun you can considerably go all armor and very little health, just for a simple fact of that high base damage of a shotgun and the advantage you have because of the high base damage of that shotgun, to where you don't need a full-blown proc of Berserk or even half of it to two-tap someone. Now the likes of the AR, if we want to get more out of it, then we're going to have to invest a little bit more into health, because we want a little bit more of our armor depleted, because we're going to need an extra proc of Berserk to get that damage out. So it's all up to your personal preference and how you feel and what do you feel comfortable with. If all you want is, an extra 10% from perfect Berserk, and that's all that you're, worried about is just getting that 10% extra damage, then you can value armor over health all day long. But the more damage you want, then the less armor you're going to have to sacrifice, because depleting 400k of your armor, that 20% is a much bigger chunk than, let's say, 20% of 200k armor. there's a very big difference. It's like twice as much armor is going to have to be stripped away per what, buff you actually get. Because when it comes to percentages, 10% of 400k is 40k. So that turns up to 80k of your armor being stripped to get that 8 to 10% extra weapon damage, versus the likes of 200k armor and then only having 40% or 40k of your armor being stripped away to get that same amount of bonus. So therefore, in turn, your armor is stripped away faster. It takes less of your armor to be stripped away in order to get that bonus damage. So in other words, you can get your damage out faster than the other. But it also depends upon what you're facing, and so that's why I always tell you not to be one-dimensional. So if you like playing with SMGs or LMGs, and you predominantly see something other, just like in pre-Title Update 6, it's predominantly, LMGs, then, you could actually go that route. You could actually invest into, more health over armor. But now that the tides have changed and ARs are more or less the top dogs when it comes to any kind of berserk builds, then you have to reevaluate the situation and reevaluate those values of your armor to health ratio as far as your sweet spot, because they're going to fluctuate with each and every update. Now they have announced some things as far as they might be looking into the max rolls when it comes to armor percentages. I mean, that might play a factor. Tuning down the 29% damage to health along the lines of 19% would bring like the rest of the weapons being more viable and not predominantly mostly ARs now or shotguns. So that's going to need some tweaking into. But with each update, you're going to have to reevaluate your sweet spot when it comes to Berserk. And it's ultimately going to be decided upon you how much and what benefit and how much of that benefit you're going to want out of the likes of, let's say, Berserk. And that is basically how armor and health work. They're exactly the same, and it all depends on the damage to health and damage to armor, what's running what. If that 29% damage to health is way over top of any other weapon, such as like when it versus an LMG, and they go head to head, then the AR is going to outright win. But it also depends on what other builds that you're actually facing, such as an AR clutch build, Berserk, is going to have a much tougher time against an armor build because they lose that 29% damage to health, which is their advantage. Now going against the likes of a health build, they have the advantage because they get that 29% damage to health. And you have to play with these values and think on the fly and have a backup plan for everything. So if you come predominantly into the dark zone and all you see is clutch health builds, throw on an armor build with an AR. You'll shred them to pieces because you take their advantage away from them. If you hardly see any, the clutch AR builds in there, and they're more or less predominantly, armor builds, then that's why you see more shotguns, because they have that super high damage, and then plus they have that 7% damage to armor. So that is why I made the video back in the day where it says this game is basically a paper, rock, scissors. But I hope I haven't confused you. I hope I've been kind of informative and, kind of explained it better for you.